Conor McGregor exploded out of Dublin with nothing but a left hand and an iron belief that the world owed him more. From welfare lines to world titles, he rose fast, talked louder, and hit harder than anyone before him. But what began as hunger turned into empire, and then into something darker. Legal troubles, broken bodies, public meltdowns. Fame didn't just change him, it consumed him. Behind the suits and sound bites was a man unraveling in real time, addicted to power, performance, and the myth he created. This isn't just a story of knockouts and championships. It's about identity, chaos, and the fight that never left the cage. Because for Conor McGregor, the biggest opponent wasn't Diaz, Mayweather, or Khabib. It was always himself. Before the lights, before the Rolexes and press conferences, there was a boy in Dublin, angry, small, and overlooked. Conor McGregor was born on July 14, 1988, in Crumlin, a rough, working-class suburb where opportunity felt like fantasy, and violence was a language you learned young. He wasn't raised in chaos, but he was raised in a world that didn't expect much from him. School bored him, authority clashed with him, and while other kids chased careers, Conor chased fists. He was a small kid, often picked on, but he had two things that changed everything: speed and rage. At 12, his mother put him into a local boxing gym, not to make him a fighter, but to help him survive. What she didn't realize was that it would awaken something deeper, something primal. Conor took to fighting instantly, not just the physicality, but the rhythm, the structure, the control it gave him over his own chaos. But as he grew older, life caught up. In his teens, he enrolled in a plumbing apprenticeship, a dead-end path that paid the bills but killed the soul. Every morning he woke up at 5 a.m. to dig trenches, then trained MMA in the evenings. It was survival, nothing more. But inside his head, something louder was screaming. He started training full-time, quit plumbing, told his family he'd be a millionaire. People laughed, coaches didn't. They saw something in him, rawness, yes, but also belief. Delusion, maybe. But focused delusion is dangerous, especially in a cage. In 2008, he made his professional MMA debut and won. Then lost, then won again. It was inconsistent, but the spark was undeniable. Every punch, every stare down, every walk to the cage, it all had electricity. Conor didn't just fight to win. He fought like he was building something with every blow, something only he could see. Meanwhile, outside the cage, he was broke, living in his parents' attic, living on Ireland's welfare system, €188 a week. There were nights he couldn't afford food. Days he wondered if the dream was dying, but he never stopped training, never stopped talking about greatness, never stopped believing. And that belief? It started to spread. In 2011 and 2012, McGregor tore through Cage Warriors, a European MMA promotion, racking up highlight reel knockouts and capturing 2 division titles, featherweight and lightweight, the first to ever do it in the promotion. He didn't just win, he called it, predicted it, performed it. The Irish scene had never seen anything like him, and neither had the UFC. In 2013, Conor McGregor was an underground sensation, a double champion in Europe, a wild card with charisma and chaos in equal measure. But in the United States, he was unknown, until Dana White, UFC president, received hundreds of fan messages from Ireland demanding one thing: sign Conor McGregor. Dana listened, he watched the tapes, and he saw it. Not just a fighter, but a star. Someone who could transcend the sport. In April of that year, McGregor made his UFC debut in Stockholm against Marcus Brimage. The pressure was massive. It was his shot, his one shot. It took him 67 seconds. One uppercut, a left hand from hell. Brimage dropped. The fight was over. Conor jumped the cage, screamed into the void, and looked straight into the cameras. "Dana, 60 G's, baby!" The crowd loved it. So did the UFC. But what followed wasn't luck, it was calculated warfare. McGregor had mastered 2 things early: fighting and attention. He didn't just win fights, he sold them. Every press conference was theater. Every post-fight interview was scripture. He made reporters laugh. He made fans chant. He made opponents shrink. In the octagon, his left hand was a weapon. But outside of it, his tongue was lethal. He rattled opponents before the cage even closed. Said he'd knock them out in 1 round. And did. Said he'd take over the game, and did. But it wasn't just hype. Behind the cameras, he was training obsessively. Hours of movement drills, visualization, sparring, ice baths, nutrition. He lived it. After demolishing Diego Brando in Dublin, the arena shook. McGregor didn't walk to the cage that night. He was carried by the crowd's roar. Irish fans flooded arenas. UFC events became nationalist parades, green flags, chants, passion. McGregor wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was a movement. And as his stock rose, so did the stakes. In 2015, after a string of knockouts, he was set to face Jose Aldo, undefeated for 10 years, the featherweight king, a killer. McGregor went on a global media tour, tearing Aldo down mentally, saying he'd sleep him in one round. Nobody believed it until it happened. 13 seconds, one punch, record broken, new champion crowned. Precision beats power, timing beats speed. McGregor had prophesied greatness and then walked straight into it. But as the spotlight intensified, so did the shadows. And the man who once fought to survive was now learning what it meant to survive his own fame. By 2016, Conor McGregor was no longer just a fighter. He was a phenomenon. Every word he spoke was a headline. Every fight he booked was an event. He wore mink coats, held 2 belts at once, and quoted philosophy between knockouts. He wasn't just dominating opponents, he was writing myth in real time. But as the spotlight expanded, so did the complexity of the character he had created. The underdog story was over. McGregor was now the face of the sport, and with that came pressure, not just to win, but to transcend. And then came Nate Diaz. Scheduled to fight lightweight champ Rafael dos Anjos, Conor was days away from making history. But RDA pulled out. Enter Diaz, scrappy, unpredictable, bigger. No time for camps, no respect for fame. At UFC 196, McGregor landed clean early, but Diaz absorbed it, then fired back. Conor gasped. He shot for a takedown, his first mistake. Diaz locked in the choke. McGregor tapped. The arena went silent. His invincibility shattered. But in the post-fight press conference, McGregor didn't run. He didn't make excuses. I took a shot. I failed. But I'll never shy away from a challenge. Fans respected it. Fighters noticed it. He returned months later and beat Diaz in a brutal 5-round war. And with that, he rebounded stronger than ever. But the next fight? Bigger than anything MMA had ever seen. At UFC 205 in Madison Square Garden, Conor McGregor faced Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight belt, a chance to become the first fighter in UFC history to hold 2 titles at once. And he made it look easy. Precision, calm, devastation. The fight was a masterclass, and when it ended, McGregor stood in the center of the cage with 2 belts, arms outstretched. King of 2 divisions. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The fans went wild. The internet broke. McGregor had reached the peak of sport and spectacle. But something shifted after that. He had what he wanted: money, status, immortality. And with that came the question no one could answer. What does a man do when he's conquered everything he was chasing? At the end of 2016, Conor McGregor stood on top of the world, the first UFC fighter to hold 2 titles simultaneously. He had done the impossible. He had gone from Dublin's welfare line to Madison Square Garden's center stage. And now, he was untouchable, or so it seemed. Because what do you chase after you've caught everything? The hunger that once drove McGregor, the fire to prove himself, to dominate, to defy the odds, began to blur. The lines between fighter and celebrity, between work and performance, between self and brand, they all began to collapse. His bank account ballooned. So did the entourage, the luxury, the image, Lamborghinis, private jets, lavish watches, tailored suits with custom insults sewn into the fabric. Conor McGregor wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was an empire, one built not only on knockouts, but on narrative. And yet, the UFC belt gathered dust. Months passed with no title defenses. He took a step back from the octagon, said he needed time, said he was focusing on family. His longtime partner Dee Devlin was pregnant, and for a while, it looked like McGregor was maturing, evolving. The young lion turned businessman, fighter turned father. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. The structure that had once kept him grounded, early training, discipline, obsession, was slipping. He wasn't waking up to spar. He was waking up to press runs, brand deals, Instagram shoots. His left hand was still lethal, but his priorities were fractured. And around him, the sport moved on. New contenders emerged. Titles changed hands. Khabib Nurmagomedov rose to the top of the lightweight division, a silent storm building in contrast to McGregor's volume. Meanwhile, the UFC stripped Conor of both titles, featherweight and lightweight. due to inactivity. Officially, the champ era was over. McGregor, for the first time in years, had no belt to his name. And yet, no one questioned his relevance. Because McGregor didn't need a title to sell a fight. He was the fight. But his focus was drifting. And with it came something far more dangerous than defeat: complacency. He wasn't just building wealth, he was building distance. From the cage, from the discipline, and maybe from the very version of himself that had created all of this. And while the world waited for his next move, Conor was about to make one no one saw coming. Not a fight, but a spectacle. In the summer of 2017, Conor McGregor broke every rule in combat sports by stepping into a boxing ring to face the undefeated king of the sport, Floyd "Money" Mayweather. No one believed it would happen. A mixed martial artist with 0 pro boxing matches against a man who was 49-0? It sounded like fantasy, like ego gone too far. But fantasy sells. The hype train was unstoppable. 4 cities, 4 press conferences, weeks of insults, theatrics, and psychological warfare. McGregor danced, screamed, suited up, and turned the build-up into performance art. Mayweather played along like a seasoned villain. When fight night arrived, August 26, 2017, the world watched. It was the second highest-selling pay-per-view in history. Over 4 million buys, hundreds of millions on the line. And McGregor, he didn't embarrass himself. For the first few rounds, he looked sharp, awkward, unpredictable, but game. He landed punches, showed movement. But Mayweather, the tactician, waited. And by the 10th round, Conor was gassed. Floyd turned it up, landed a flurry, and the ref stepped in. TKO. Conor lost the fight, but not the war. He walked away with a reported $100 million. Overnight, he became one of the richest athletes on earth. The fight didn't hurt his image. It elevated it. McGregor had done what no MMA fighter ever had, crossed over and conquered attention. But money doesn't just change your tax bracket, it changes your access, your insulation, your identity. After the Mayweather fight, something broke loose. McGregor's life became a montage of private jets, whiskey deals, designer campaigns, and chaos. He launched Proper Number 12, his own whiskey brand, and used every post-fight interview to plug it. It sold millions of bottles. But the cage? It stayed empty. He didn't fight for over a year. And when he did return, it wasn't with clarity. It was with rage. In April 2018, McGregor and his entourage stormed a UFC media event in Brooklyn. He threw a metal dolly at a bus carrying fighters, including Khabib Nurmagomedov. Broken glass, injuries, arrest. The fallout was immediate. He was charged with assault, fined, sued. The man who once rose on charm and precision was now headlining tabloids for violence without purpose. He paid the fines, settled the cases. But the damage wasn't legal, it was psychological. The world was watching a fighter unravel into a celebrity. And still, there was no fight scheduled. Just money, just madness, just the sound of a man who had once chased glory, now chasing the feeling of chasing. By 2018, the man who once embodied discipline now embodied chaos. Conor McGregor's empire was thriving, but the man himself was drifting. The headlines shifted from fight promos to police reports. In Dublin, he was caught on camera punching an elderly man in a pub, allegedly for refusing a shot of Proper Number 12. In Miami, he smashed a fan's phone outside a hotel. Each incident seemed random, avoidable, senseless. But they weren't just mistakes. They were symptoms. Fame had once fueled McGregor. Now, it masked him. The man who trained like a monk and talked like a poet had become a caricature of his own mythology. Inside the cage, he was absent. Outside it, he was everywhere. Whiskey ads, fashion shoots, talk shows, Instagram stories at 3 a.m., sparking more questions than answers. And fans started to shift. Some defended him, saying he was just being Conor. Others saw a man spiraling, a cautionary tale in real time. The same fans who had once watched his rise with pride were now watching his fall with confusion. And the UFC? They were stuck. McGregor still sold tickets, still moved numbers, but his brand was getting harder to manage, more volatile, less heroic. And behind the scenes, fighters were circling, younger, hungrier, less distracted. The game had moved on, but Conor hadn't. He spoke often about returning. "The king is back," he'd tweet, but the reality was different. Training camps were inconsistent. Motivation came in flashes. Interviews grew more erratic. There was always another headline. And then came Khabib, the most dominant lightweight the sport had ever seen. Silent, devout, focused. The opposite of McGregor in every way. Their fight, set for October 2018, wasn't just a title bout. It was a clash of ideologies: noise versus discipline, flash versus foundation, West versus East, hype versus humility. The lead-up was brutal. McGregor attacked Khabib's religion, family, nation. It wasn't just mind games, it was warfare. But in the octagon, there was no war, just a dismantling. Khabib smothered him, controlled him, choked him out in the fourth round, then jumped the cage and started a brawl. Chaos inside and outside the cage. And McGregor? He looked exposed, not just as a fighter, but as a man who had lost touch with why he ever started fighting in the first place. After the Khabib fight in 2018, Conor McGregor disappeared, at least from the cage. He was suspended for his role in the post-fight brawl, fined $500,000, stripped of respect, and the silence that followed was deafening. Not because he had lost, that had happened before, but because this loss looked different. It was surgical, humbling, and undeniably one-sided. McGregor had always bounced back with words, with swagger, with delusion as confidence. But after Khabib, there were no bold predictions, no post-fight bravado, just silence. For months, he flirted with retirement, teased returns, launched more whiskey campaigns. But the focus? Gone. The narrative? Broken. Yet still, he was the biggest star the sport had. The UFC needed him back. He needed purpose. In January 2020, after 15 months away, McGregor returned to face Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone at welterweight. This time he was quiet, calm. No trash talk, no theatrics. And then, 40 seconds. That's all it took. A head kick, a few punches, fight over. The Notorious had returned. Or had he? Because the humility that followed felt genuine. He praised Cerrone, hugged his grandmother, spoke about fatherhood, structure, and redemption. Fans called it the new Conor, a man reborn, a man who had learned, but peace was temporary. 1 year later, he returned to face Dustin Poirier, a rematch of their 2014 bout. Conor looked sharp in the first round, light on his feet, dangerous again. But in round 2, Dustin turned up the pressure, leg kicks, power shots. McGregor was stunned, rocked, finished, knocked out for the first time in his MMA career. The myth cracked again. McGregor promised a trilogy. He trained hard, spoke louder, and in July 2021, they met again. But this time, the ending wasn't dramatic. It was grotesque. Conor threw a kick, landed on his own foot, and snapped his leg clean in half. Just like that, the fight was over. McGregor sat on the canvas, screaming in pain, cursing Poirier's wife from the floor. Not a warrior, a wounded king. The footage went viral, the memes exploded, and the question hit harder than any punch. Was this the end? Because for the first time since his rise began, McGregor wasn't feared, he was pitied. Recovery from a broken leg is long, painful, and uncertain. But for Conor McGregor, the physical rehab was only part of the battle. The bigger war was internal. Because what does a fighter become when he can't fight? In the months that followed his injury, McGregor kept posting gym selfies, motivation quotes, yacht parties, whiskey promos. But the fire? It felt different, more curated, less organic. The Conor who once shadowboxed in hotel rooms with nothing but a dream was now selling suits and supplements. The man who rose by chasing legacy was now surrounded by luxury without urgency. Still, there were flashes. Interviews where he spoke with clarity, moments with his children that softened his image. A documentary-style presence crept into his online content. McGregor as brand, yes, but also McGregor as father, patient, survivor. He began hinting at a comeback, targeting new opponents, talking about weight jumps. But there was no timeline, no contract, just speculation. The UFC continued without him. Titles changed hands, stars emerged, and McGregor became more of a shadow, an icon, not a contender. Yet he remained the highest-paid athlete on earth in 2021, not from fighting, from selling his whiskey brand for over $600 million. It was a staggering win, but also a turning point, because the question was no longer, will he come back? It was, why would he? When you've made more money outside the cage than inside it, what's the incentive to return? When pain becomes optional and comfort becomes standard, what's left to prove? McGregor said he wanted to fight again. He said he'd be champion again. But the world no longer believed it the way they used to, not because he wasn't capable, but because he no longer looked hungry. And Conor McGregor without hunger isn't Conor McGregor. He had reinvented himself a dozen times, from plumber to fighter, fighter to icon, icon to mogul. And now, maybe, something else entirely. But the one version he hadn't yet returned to? The competitor. And until he does, redemption remains incomplete. Conor McGregor today is a paradox. A man still training like a world champion, but living like a retired billionaire. He is both present and absent from the sport, both a fighter and a brand far larger than fighting. His face is on billboards. His voice echoes through highlight reels. But in the rankings, he's nowhere. In the title picture, faded. He hasn't won a meaningful fight in years, and yet his name still sells out arenas, still breaks pay-per-view records, still starts arguments. Because Conor was never just about wins, he was about moments, walkouts that made the air electric, one-liners that broke the internet, celebrations that felt like coronations, and collapses that felt like myth crashing into mortality. But behind all the theater, who is he now? There's no clear answer. Some say he's a businessman who used the sport to build an empire. Others say he's still got one last run left in him, a final redemption arc, one more miracle. And some, they say he's done, that the king has become the court jester, no longer feared, just remembered. But maybe that's the real story. Maybe Conor McGregor's legacy isn't about belts or records. Maybe it's about impact. He brought eyes to the sport that had never looked, turned casual fans into believers, turned cage fighting into global entertainment. He built personas, rivalries, drama, not as gimmicks, but as weapons. He made MMA bigger and made himself unforgettable. But the man beneath the mask? He's harder to pin down. Is he the humble father training quietly in his gym? Or the showman shouting in sunglasses, chasing headlines? Is he a legend searching for closure? Or a ghost trapped inside his own myth? Only time will tell. But this much is clear. Conor McGregor didn't just fight opponents. He fought expectations, doubt, poverty, insecurity, and maybe most of all, himself. And that war, that one, may never end.